Good evening, and welcome to the 5th Annual Dallas Festival. This year we're calling it the Dallas Festival of Books and Ideas, presented by the Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. My name's Tom Wong. I'm Assistant Managing Editor at the Dallas Morning News, and this is my good friend and planning partner, Larry Allams, Director of the Dallas Institute. We have many people to thank this evening, beginning with our festival partners, many of whom are in this room tonight: the Dallas Public Library, the Friends of the Dallas Public Library, the Dallas Museum of Art, and PEN America. Also a special shout out to Jenya Wong and the special food provided by the Syrian chefs at Break Bread, Break Borders. Thank you, Jenya. This festival is made possible by the generosity of our sponsors: City Track sponsor, the Sapphire Foundation; advocate sponsors, Baylor, Scott & White, the Lyda Hill Philanthropies, and Dee Dee Rose, and our other sponsors listed in the program and on signage and screens. Finally, we'd like to recognize and thank the leadership of the Dallas Morning News, President and Publisher Grant Moise, and Editor Mike Wilson, and of the Dallas Institute, Board co-chairs Russell Bellamy and David Griffin.
So the Dallas Festival has always had a straightforward but challenging goal, and that is to make Dallas a better city for everyone. The theme for 2019 is the Open City. It's all about making connections. Once the program committee came up with the theme, we then formed planning groups. They're listed in the program, each of which determined the focus of its city track and suggested keynote speakers and panelists. And this year we have a different format. Rather than presenting the festival in a single day in one place, as in the past, we're conducting it over an entire week at a different venue each night. We kicked off last night at the Brain Performance Center at UT Dallas out on Mockingbird. It was a wonderful evening. And tonight we're in my home place, my home base, with the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. We hope you'll be joining us during the week for other festival programs and other venues which are listed in the program you've received tonight. So look at them and see if you can be with us again in the rest of the week.
We'll now begin tonight's program on the Welcoming City, which will explore how Dallas can welcome and include its great and growing diversity of residents and visitors. Please note two things as we begin. You'll have a chance. Are we going to use the index cards tonight?
No, we're going to.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to roaming mic.
Okay, so we're going to have roaming mics for the Q&A period after the panel discussion. And then at the conclusion of the program at 8:30, we invite you to remain for a 30-minute smaller group talkback when we consider further some of the ideas presented during the program. Quite candidly, I'm a little skeptical about the talkback. Larry, do you want to talk about how this is going to work?
Yeah, what we'll do at the end of the program, we will take a short break, and the Dallas Institute never wants to tell anybody you've got to leave now, right? We like to continue and continue. So we're going to take a short break, and then those of you who have to leave, we understand, you can depart, and then the others will herd you up closer so we can have a more informal conversation with our panelists. Get another glass of wine, come back in here, and then we'll continue for a few minutes around until about 9 o'clock. So hope it'll work. Okay. So now we'll turn the program over to our moderator, Alfredo Carbajal, managing editor of Al Dia and senior editor for the Dallas Morning News News Cabinet. He leads the Hispanic Audience Initiative, where he works with business area directors on strategic journalism and audience growth initiatives. Alfredo.
Thank you, Larry and Tom, and good evening, everybody. Welcome. You are welcome. How many times do we say those words every day? How many times do we do that? And what that means, and what do we mean by saying those words? So I Googled origins of the word welcome the last few days and got something very interesting. In Old English, that's about 500 years ago, there was this word in Old English, welcome, and I hope I'm doing justice to the pronunciation. Welcome, who comes from two sources. The word will with a single L, which indicates willingness, and the word kuma or kuma, which means guest or somebody who is invited. Other languages in Europe also had variations of this word, welcoming in Norse, a traditional language in Iceland, and also in Old German, there's the word willkommen. So as you can see, there's a lot of commonality. The point here is to illustrate the concept behind the word welcome and what we convey when we say that we're welcoming others. Personally, I like this word a lot. Welcome, I think, not only conveys a positive sentiment, but also the predisposition to embrace, to help, to support, and to build together. Suddenly, now we're talking about a communal value, a key component of the social contract that serves as the basis to build the society that we desire. Today, we're very lucky to have a panel with representatives of different communities that live in Dallas, and we'll discuss the idea of Dallas being a welcoming city. I'll introduce them in a few minutes, but before that, we're gonna ask Keven Ann Willey to kick off the discussion and give us some of the intriguing ideas that she's gonna be sharing with this group. Keven is the former editor of the editorial page of the Dallas Morning News, and also a Dallas transplant herself for the last 17 years, -1, and she'll explain that. Her bio is on the official website of the Festival of Ideas, and you'll see the vast experience and many roles that she's played in her journalism career. So please, let's utilize that word, the one that is congregating us tonight, to welcome Keven to the podium.
Well, thank you very much for that welcome. I am happy to be back here, one of my favorite places in all of Dallas. I love the Dallas Institute and what it does and what it stands for, so I'm pleased to be here and pleased to see all of you as well. As Alfredo alluded to, my husband and I have been on a trip for a year. We just returned from a year on the road in our 17-foot little casita travel trailer. We left on February 2 of last year, just a few days after I retired from the morning news, and we took off to spend a year exploring the edges of America. This is what we lived in for a year. We had a terrific time, and it turns out that our route around the perimeter of the U.S. was about 27,000 miles by the time we completed it. We had a few brief forays into Canada and Mexico. That sum is longer than the circumference of the Earth at the equator. But as I said, we enjoyed nearly every mile of it. But I will confess that some areas on our trip were more welcoming than others. Now that's a photo from the Gulf Coast of Texas near the start of our trek. But that's not the only time we felt a little unwelcome. We couldn't find a picnic spot, for example, to save our lives last April as we were on the lovely beach community of Seaside near Destin on the Florida Panhandle coast. The traffic and the congestion made movement really difficult, and whoever had the monopoly, whoever cornered the market on no parking signs and private beach signs had to be making a killing. We saw dozens of them on both sides of the road driving through town. It seemed like they were shouting at us, "Get out of town." So we did. In New Jersey, the steep toll fares and the ban on pumping your own gas were unexpectedly off-putting. So were the fact that in June one day we paid $15 in highway tolls, and that was before noon. Conversely, the farmers market in Brunswick, Maine, later that same month, was amazingly full of welcoming people and a warm and inviting cornucopia of fresh food and wares. And one of my favorite stories is about Rick, We met him at a laundromat in Detroit, and he was a welcoming gem. First of all, when he found out that we were parking our casita in a parking lot nearby because we wanted to get to the Henry Ford Museum early the next morning, he suggested that maybe we should move our casita to a different supermarket in a safer part of town. So we did, and then the next morning, a car pulled up as we were sipping our coffee, and it was Rick coming to the parking lot he had told us to go to make sure that we had had a good time in his beloved city. What a sweetheart. That's welcoming. So I was reminded of some of these experiences as I began to think about what it is that makes a welcoming city. For us, we were really just sort of passers-by in all of these cities, but to us it meant things like friendly people, safe streets, easily accessible visitor centers, public bathrooms that were clean and worked, Wi-Fi, and free maps. Those are rather the basics, right? There's nothing more welcoming than a friendly smile in a strange place, and there's nothing worse, really, than a dirty bathroom. And why would you charge somebody for the privilege of not getting lost in your city? Still, it is surprising, I think, how many communities overlook the importance of getting the basics right. But as I said, we were just passers through. What's really important for communities is to know how to make people feel welcome who are going to stay a little longer than a few days. And I'm here to argue that communities that do that best will prosper, and those that don't, won't. Some say that Dallas is already really welcoming. The DFW area, after all, attracts more net newcomers than any other major region in the country. That's according to a Bloomberg analysis of 2017 census figures. Now think about that for a minute. That means, I did a little math, that 246 more people arrive here every day than depart for greener pastures. That's almost a new city of Allen every year. So we're clearly doing something right. Most of these people come for jobs. According to the Texas Workforce Commission, Texas created more jobs year over year than any other state in the nation. Others come for the low cost of living, for the climate, for family connections, what have you. But how welcome do these people feel after they get here? Do they prosper? Does Dallas prosper? And what about the people already in Dallas, some of whom are from families that have lived here for generations and have yet to experience any real upward mobility? Too many of these people remain excluded from the city's power structure. So how welcome do they feel? Complicating matters is the fact that not everybody who lives here looks alike, thinks alike, worships alike, or even speaks alike. Let's face some facts. Old Dallas and its stereotype of white bread, Highland Park domination is gone. Dallas is a mecca for all kinds of migrants and all kinds of immigrants. And this only heightens the challenge of making the diverse populations all feel welcome. Consider that nearly 1 of every 4 current Dallas residents was born outside of the United States. That's 300,000 people in Dallas alone. This is all off of the city website. Or that nearly half of the city's population growth between 2011 and 2016 came from foreign-born transplants. And contrary to the uninformed rhetoric of some, these newcomers are not freeloaders. In fact, they fuel our economy. In addition to paying taxes, immigrants make up 1/3 of Dallas's employed labor force and nearly 1/4 of its science and technology workers. Immigrants are 1/4 of this city's population, yet fully 1/3 of its entrepreneurs. Those that own their own businesses generate nearly $500 million in business income each year. And in 2016, fully 93% of the 63,000 DACA-eligible immigrants in the area were employed. Those are the deferred action for childhood arrivals, young people. They paid $89 million in federal taxes and $72 million in state and local taxes. Now, I know there's a concern in some quarters about the wisdom of welcoming all comers, a fear that certain types of newcomers will drag city fortunes down or drive up the crime rate or plain and simple take the job that I should have had. But the answer isn't erecting walls or marginalizing populations. These actions only deepen divisions. They heighten fear. They embolden hate. They broaden hopelessness. And they strangle prosperity. Life isn't a zero-sum game where one side gains only if the other loses. Fear is the lion that comity tames. So the answer is building a culture of inclusiveness, respect, expectations, connectedness. The answer is having a system that welcomes people into the system where communities can then interconnect. A welcoming city is a successful city. And a successful city, to borrow a phrase made famous by a former president, a rising tide lifts all boats. So let's spend some time brainstorming ways for Dallas to become a truly welcoming city. I'd like to start by recognizing that there are many welcoming initiatives already in progress. Indeed, the people you're about to hear from on the panel are leading some of the most important. Liz's work, for instance, in getting the city to adopt a strategic plan embracing sustainable, welcoming public policies is groundbreaking. Mercedes's work at Local Progress Center for Popular Democracy, and before that, in establishing the African American Leadership Institute at Paul Quinn College, is visionary. Jinya's Catering with a Cause work at Break Bread, Break Borders is critical. And Omar's work at the Institute and his belief that faith leaders can teach people how to do what divisive politicians count on them not to do, which is talk to each other, as he wrote recently in the Dallas Morning News, is inspirational. So clearly a lot of wonderful people are doing a lot of important and wonderful things. Let's just do more, and let's do more better. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and engage in a little what-if imagination. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine yourself, if you will, in a room full of strangers. Everyone has two heads and is dressed in green. You have one head, and you're dressed in red. Clearly, you're feeling a little out of place. So what would make you feel welcome in a crowd like that? You can open your eyes. How about a smile like this? First, a smile. Let's not underestimate first impressions or the oversized impact of something as small and simple as a smile. What if the first person every newcomer encountered in Dallas began each conversation with some variation of, "Welcome to Dallas. We're glad you're here. What can I do to help you?" Is there a public campaign around that? Second, what if as you're standing in that doorway, wavering somewhere between your fight and flight impulses, one of the people in the room actually beckons you over and offers to show you around? Extrapolating a little bit from that, what if each newcomer to Dallas were matched with a long-term resident who acts as a contact, a sounding board, an informal mentor, somebody who can help calm a newcomer's sensory overload or unravel the tangle of alphabet soup organizations? Somebody who might explain how those left turn lanes on the freeway access roads work, that West Village really isn't west of downtown, and that South Dallas isn't a region but a specific neighborhood. Somebody who can point the way to lists of places with free Wi-Fi, places of worship, places with resources, places of wildflowers. Taking this concept to the next level, what if such mentoring were somehow institutionalized? What if a revitalized Dallas Volunteer Center developed an emphasis on training ambassadors systematically to provide migrants to Dallas with mentors from Dallas to make them feel welcome and connect them to the community? What if every newcomer to Dallas, whether from another country or another county, received an action-packed welcome package? It would contain tips for living in Dallas in their own language, info about schools and libraries, the local media, utilities, a summary of local government, how that government works or is supposed to work, information on where to vote. Maybe there's a small memento of some sort in the welcome packet, fresh produce from Bonton Farms, a Neiman Marcus trinket, a Stars t-shirt, a digital subscription to the Dallas Morning News. And let's not focus exclusively on the newcomers. A lot has changed in Dallas in recent years, and there's something to be said for acquainting longtime Dallasites with that change and making them feel welcome as the city transitions. What if there were regular tours, free, to acquaint both newcomers and natives with areas of town other than their own, areas that they're not familiar with, places of worship they've never experienced, cultures that feel foreign? How many residents in Preston Hollow have been to Kessler Theater? How many residents of Cadillac Heights have hung out at the Dallas Museum of Art? Call it systemized bubble busting. It's about encouraging residents to see, to experience, to appreciate, respect lives that are lived differently than their own. What if the city had a set of well-known and well-utilized places for constructing a sense of continued connectiveness? Think Clyde Warren Park, that wonderful stretch of urban green space where thousands of people from all ages, backgrounds, incomes, and experiences gather every week to enjoy diverse forms of music, food, games, exercise, or just each other. Or a pumped-up version of Dallas Dinner Table, where the participants gather once a year in private homes across the metro area to talk with others beyond their own neighborhoods about the impact that race has had in their daily lives. What if neighborhoods across the city hosted regular gatherings of natives and newcomers around the concept of storytelling? Gatherings where we share our stories, how we got here, how our grandparents got here, what we learned, how we persevered. The stories could be written, musical, visual, culinary. Break Bread, Break Borders is a form of such storytelling. What if our city actually found ways to make such sharing regular and systemic, to build our origin stories into the DNA of our community? Now, speaking of public policy, what if there were more ways to bend our free market economy toward areas of greatest need? What if our city created ways to incentivize development in historically underdeveloped areas? Areas of town where young people have historically had fewer opportunities, areas of town with huge tax base potential that have lain fallow for decades. What if in good economic times, the Dallas City Council made its approval of mega-million-dollar developments contingent upon some sort of sliding scale investment in underdeveloped areas? In other words, approval of a tax subsidy over here contingent on a community investment over there. Now, the city has experimented with such policy, to be sure, but with mixed results. What if it found a way to make such contingent partnerships successful and systemic? That tide would lift a lot of boats. And finally, are your eyes metaphorically still closed? What if Dallas had the best public education system in America? What does public education have to do with being a welcoming city? Well, let's think about that. Most people move to a place to get ahead or to lay the foundation for their kids to get ahead. A top quality education is the graphite in the keyhole of success. Mayor Rawlings knows this. He's invested a good part of his political capital in efforts to jumpstart Dallas Independent School District to a better place, because he knows how critical a top quality public education system is to a city's success. Now, remember that room full of strangers I described early on? A top quality public education system would surely entice you to enter that room of green garbed, two-headed strangers, wouldn't it? A community with a public education system known for positioning kids on the path to prosperity, one that's dedicated to your child's success. That would make you and your family feel welcome. Okay, so now you can open your eyes, metaphorically or otherwise. Those are just a few of the what-ifs that I was playing with in my mind as I gave some thought to this evening. They ranged from smiles to spirit guides to storytelling to bubble busting, incentivized development investments, and public education. There are certainly myriad other ideas, and I think now's the time to begin discussing them. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me well? Are we good now? Okay, well, thank you, Kevin. Certainly you gave us a lot to discuss, a lot of ideas. And one of the things I want to do is our participants' bios, they're on the program and also on the website. So I'm not going to spend time going through their bios, but I'll just briefly mention and go through the panel here and open up with a question. This will be the only question that I have for all of them. And then after that, we're going to have a conversation a little bit more about the issues and the topics. So Omar Suleiman, let's start with you. Is there a definition for a welcoming city? What are the parameters? If we are to say we want to be a welcoming city or we are a welcoming city in Dallas, what are the metrics? How do we measure that and either understand that we're successful or not?
So I think that in the presentation, a few of those things came up. So welcoming in terms of authenticity, welcoming in terms of inclusion, welcoming in terms of safety, welcoming in terms of opportunity. And I think that there's one dimension that I'd also add to that is why do you want to be welcoming in the first place? Are you trying to welcome tourists and new businesses? Are we trying to welcome Amazon? Or are we trying to welcome our existing residents? So the intention behind the particular flavor of welcoming that we seek to introduce into our city, will manifest itself, I think, in a lot of the projects that we see come up in the city. And, I think that when you go to, I'm from New Orleans, so our welcoming in New Orleans was just being crazy, comfortable, authentic. Everybody does whatever the food is welcoming for sure. But then, in New Orleans, I would challenge people in New Orleans, and I'd say, well, we might be welcoming with our authenticity and we might be welcoming with our culture, but we also have serious safety issues. So you're not welcome once you step out of that street and you have to worry about, the crime rate, right? So there are different dimensions of it. But here in Dallas, I would point to, this idea that being welcoming does not necessarily mean that you have to make major sacrifices. And what I mean by that is that you can align interests. Sometimes there are certain things that are going to have to be compromised in order to be welcoming, and we have to be welcoming because being welcoming is the right thing to do, not because it will attract more visitors to the city, not because it will attract more investment, but because we actually believe that being welcoming is a part of decency, and it's a part of what we should be doing. But I look at, the block that I'm most familiar with in Dallas is Thanksgiving Square and Cafe Momentum. So Thanksgiving Square, and I'm not biased at all, Thanksgiving Square, but, the sentiment, the feeling of Thanksgiving Square is very special. Then you walk across to a place like Cafe Momentum where you see there's a thriving business, but there's a shared interest in actually bettering the condition of at-risk youth and making things not just comfortable, but making things better for an entirety of a population, not just a segment of the population. So I think being welcoming is when you are able to strategically bring together numerous good interests and make them at harmony with one another, rather than accept this conclusion that if we become more welcoming towards immigrants, then we're going to lose this, or if we become too culturally open, we're going to make our residents uncomfortable. If a sign is broadcasting this, how's that going to make these people feel? I think that we bring it all together and we align good interests to make us more welcoming in the comprehensive sense, where we take into consideration safety and security, as well as authenticity and openness and inclusion, and make that for the betterment of everybody.
Ms. Edis, how do you define a welcoming city?
I would say one that is people-focused. Much of my beliefs and work that I do is democracy building and strengthening. And so a lot of that is about making sure that everyone has a seat at the table in the decision-making process. And so when I think about sustaining and even investing in the city, it's about the people and their needs and their concerns. And so when we talk about electing people into office and them deciding on a city budget, I think about the decision-making process that community members should be involved in that process, and how that's not reflective locally in our city council and much of our school board city budget. I'm also of the understanding that a budget is a moral document, and so you place value on certain things when you decide on what should be invested in the city. Right. And so when I look at our city's budget, right now we spend more than 60% of our budget on policing. Right. And so I interpret that as we are valuing more of criminalizing people than investments in neighborhoods and creating safety in ways that people create public safety and reimagine and redefine public safety in their own neighborhoods. And so for me, much of how I see a welcoming city is one that uplifts and centers the voices of the people who live in these communities, and allows them to make the decision-making process and the financial investments in their neighborhoods, and be a part of creating and envisioning what it actually looks like to sustain and nourish and stabilize a community in a way that is outside of criminalizing them, but creating real safety, which is community. Yes. And you don't see that right now in our city's budget that says that community should be the focus of our city. It's actually about business interests and putting more people in cages, to be frank, but also that we should focus more on that than creating job opportunities or investing in early child education or investing in infrastructure and things of that sort. And so for me, a welcoming city really is about the needs and concerns of people. And if you actually talk to people, they're not going to say that I want to be criminalized. They will say things like, there's potholes in my street. And I'm speaking of my neighborhood. I live in South Dallas, right off of Malcolm X and South Boulevard. And for me, that it is our infrastructure. It is lack of jobs. It is the school system, the high schools and the neighborhood schools there, and the fact that we have to create community for ourselves because there's a direct divestment from neighborhoods like South Dallas that our city doesn't place value on. And so we have to do that ourselves and have these community meetings and opportunities where we can redefine that for ourselves. And so again, welcoming city for me is about people and their voices and what their needs and concerns are, and putting in the financial investment to do that.
Thank you. Jinja Wan, so we heard from Kevin talking about many what ifs, ways in which the community and the society in Dallas could be a lot more welcoming. Give us your perspective from your experience as a Dallas resident, what's working, what's not, and also the definition of what is it that we need to attach that label of being a welcoming city.
Well, sure. So, goodness. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so I am a social practice artist, and so I started out actually as a visual artist, and so the photograph that I have in my head of a welcoming city is about practicing goodness, kindness, generosity. That's how I was taught. I actually grew up in Taipei, Taiwan, and came to the States when I was 13, and my aunt and uncle were starting a family business, so my dad had lost his job, and so we came to the United States to help out. And my mom was a chef, and she was very much a community leader. And so she, welcomed people with food and culture. And so to me, very much of this is about preserving the art and the beautifulness of the culture, and that is something that to me is more sustainable, and that is totally scalable as well. And sharing this beautifulness that is such a great universal language, that it is amazing to be able to share that with the community. And so often what I do is, as a social practice artist, that when the community asks for fire, I don't bring them water. And it's about having that continuous conversation and asking what is needed and what's the best way that I can serve my community. And there's so many things that happen in that process that as long as you keep that open, it's amazing what blends of things can come about. And that was a reason why I continue to practice my art this way, was I was taught this way, and I think that can be celebrated in so many incredible opportunities, because I know that when we invest in women, the United Nations studies is that 90% of the women, actually women spend 90% of their resources, and they invest it straight back into the communities. And guys, no offense, your percentage is much lower. It's like 75. And so gotta step it up. And we, at Break Borders, I don't know if you guys got a chance to taste some of the cooking that happened tonight, is about sharing this food and culture, and is about rolling out that welcoming carpet and saying, it doesn't matter what your background is, you're always welcome. And if I didn't speak English and I cooked you food and smiled at you, and the food is delicious, that is a universal language that that spreads not only the art and the culture, but pure and simple love and compassion. And to me, that is the ultimate welcoming city.
Thank you. So Liz, you're not only a Dallas resident, born and raised. You had your private professional practice before getting to government, but now also you're part of City Hall and government and the efforts to Dallas become a welcoming city. So give us your perspective, and also is there a definition for what is a welcoming city? One of the questions that the issues that we had discussed as we were preparing for this panel is you drive across America, you encounter this a lot, I'm sure, and you see the sign that says All American City, or cities that say carbon neutral city. There's a metric for all of those things. Are we onto something as we talk about being a welcoming city? From your perspective, again, as a Dallas resident, a native, and also from government, what's that definition?
Great. Well, I'll start with government, because that's the easiest. In my current capacity as the director of the Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs Office for the city, I always like to take a poll. How many people here know that we have this Office of Welcoming here at the city? Yes, more than 3. That's good. And in fact, several of our task force members are here. I'm sitting beside one of them, and really grateful for this opportunity to lead this initiative that Mayor Rawlings, together with our city manager, together with our city council, thought was important in these times, and really gave me a blank slate and said, do what you can do. And so, knowing quite a few friends, being here all my life. In fact, I used to shop here. It was a former resale shop right here in this building. And my mom was a merchant and sold resold clothes, used clothing, at an outdoor flea market on Carroll Avenue to help pay for our parochial school education. So didn't realize, that all of these traits my mom had, this ability to turn lemons into lemonade and pay for 5 kids through Catholic school education, and was my idea, my North Star, if you will, of welcoming. Because at outdoor flea markets, although we don't have them as many as we used to, I know because I used to spend my childhood going to different flea markets, and it was really the, looking back, the idea of we talked about where do we find welcoming space. You find it in Thanksgiving Square. You might find it in restaurants. You might find it. I found welcoming spaces in mercados, in pulgas, growing up. And it was because it was the one place in the city of Dallas as I was growing up in the 70s and 80s where you could see everybody. And so that is my idea of a welcoming space. If I have a mission, if somebody asks me, what would you define as your welcoming city? Personally, it would be that wherever you go in the city of Dallas, you could see everybody. And you wouldn't have to go to this place or this place to eat this type of food. The food would be available to you, right, where you want it, or to make friends of different nationalities. As a Dallas resident, I'm sure I'll die here. I would love for us to spend some what-ifing together toward achieving that, because it does take policy, and it does take programming, and it does take joint efforts working across sectors and across communities and across cultures and across lines to make that happen. But I feel like, I'm always this constant optimist that it could happen. If we could do it at the flea market, we could do it all over Dallas. And I see that in malls now, which kind of concerns me, because I see kids of all backgrounds at the malls, and it makes me joyful. But now not everybody's not shopping at the mall. So I was like, we had to figure out a way to keep our malls thriving, because they do offer this sort of magnetism of different people. But how we did it at the city was bringing 85 people to a task force, which we call the Welcoming Task Force. And we spent several months knocking on doors, talking to people, seeing who might be interested. And we asked about 85 people, and 85 people said yes. And that's sort of the spirit of Dallas, I think, is that we're really wonderful at responding, to critical needs. And we spent a year meeting monthly to talk about just that question that you both posed, Keven and Alfredo, that what is a welcoming city? And we didn't start with any notion or any sort of, we're going to get to this place, or this is what we got to do. We just blank slate, what is a welcome city to you? What is a welcoming city to you? And at the end, we all came together. It was quite a dialogue, put together 5 overarching goals, 26 big recommendations, about 113 strategies, which are online if you ever want to keep yourself up at night. But it's a lot of good stuff that was completely community driven and adopted by the city council last October unanimously. So I was just over the moon thinking that it happened. I thought maybe we would get a few of those items approved, but the whole city council was behind it, and we've just been working diligently to try to fulfill that mission. But ultimately, we decided a welcoming city is a city where we embrace our diversity.
Thank you. So Kevin, you gave us a lot, and we'll spend some time talking about that. But one of the elements that you mentioned in your presentation, you said Dallas is a mecca for all kinds of migrants and all kinds of immigrants. You've been here for 17 years. Is this how you think now as opposed to 17 years ago? Tell us about how you came to form that idea of being a welcoming mecca.
Well, it's an interesting question, because when I came to Dallas, I'm one of the people who came here for a job. I came here to work at the Dallas Morning News, and I was very excited about that opportunity. I didn't know a lot about Dallas. I mean, I think I was sort of perhaps a typical American. I thought of Dallas as a place where, JFK was assassinated, and I just didn't know a lot beyond, and the Dallas TV show. That was probably the extent of my knowledge, but I knew the community
was a big and growing community with exciting things on the horizon and a great newspaper to work for. So I came here, and my husband and I moved downtown, and we've been at Farmers Market for 15, 16 years now. Back in the day when Farmers Market, there weren't very many pedestrians walking the streets, and it was only Farmers Market on the weekends, and then only sometimes. And now, of course, it's exploded, and it's just wonderful. We have lots of pedestrians, and we want more of them. And in that process, I've learned more and more about Dallas and understood more and more about its diversity. And all you have to do is open your eyes and see it. So I guess that's a knowledge that has come over time, but is fairly obvious to anybody who looks for it, I think. I suspect most of the people in this room, you're here because you recognize that. And so one of my interests is figuring out how we can take an idea or ideas and make them sustainable or systemic or something that's long lasting and that has a continued lifespan to it, rather than some one-offs.
So the reason I started the conversation asking each of them their idea about what is a welcoming city is so that we can bring to the surface some of the initial ideas and the representation and also their experience. And I hear different things, but in some cases it could be opposing ideas. So we talk about kindness being one of those elements, but also elements about social justice first. How do we reconcile those elements? How do we get to the point that we address the priorities on social justice or representation, as you alluded to? Mercedes, can you talk a little bit more about that element of social justice as a prerequisite for integration and that element of being welcome?
Yeah. So I know my bio is in there. I don't feel like it really gives much to what I do, but I work at the intersection of policy and community organizing. So much of my work is working with local elected officials across the state and working alongside community organizations like Texas Organizing Project and Workers Defense Project and labor movements. And we spend a lot of time working together addressing issues of workers, of LGBT folks, of immigrants, folks that I would say are on the margins in any neighborhood or city. And we spend time trying to come up with policy interventions, right? Addressing social injustices that are happening at the local level, acknowledging that we live in a state that creates a lot of gaps that people fall through, and there aren't a lot of investments in social safety nets because of that. And so for me, much of how I show up just in spaces like this is about the policy interventions that are necessary to change the trajectory of a person's life or a family's life. And so when I think about addressing the social injustice in our community, it really is about the budget, right? And being very honest and critical about what it looks like to invest in a community around livable wages, right? Everything around us is increasing, but wages are stagnant. And so when we talk about a thriving community, how can folks do that if poverty is concentrated in parts of the city? And we live in a city that there are two sides of it, right? There's two halves of it. And the communities that I work with predominantly are Black and brown communities that are suffering at the hands of folks who do not believe in livable wages, that don't believe in paid sick leave, that do not believe in protecting workers and creating safety, or even simply giving workers dignity, right? It's simple as that. Most of the folks that live in our city are below the poverty line. Last I read, we're number 3 still in childhood poverty. And when I think about childhood poverty, I think about the number of adults who are in poverty, right? Kids cannot be in poverty if their parents are not either. And so I think about that and what that looks like, and the fact that job creation and opportunities in many of the neighborhoods that we work in don't exist because infrastructure isn't there. There is an investment in simply an infrastructure to get folks to these places. And I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to work at Paul Quinn, because a lot of the work that I did there was working with that surrounding neighborhood like Highland Hills and trying to understand the needs of what poverty meant for that community, recognizing that many of our students were coming from similar neighborhoods but from across the country. And so we were simply having conversations with folks just across the street from the college about folks having to get up at 4:30 in the morning to get on the DART bus to travel to Neiman Marcus in Irving, and what that meant, and how time is money, and how a lot of people lose a lot of money because they're wasting time just trying to get to places to make money that isn't even livable for them. And so you have neighborhoods like Highland Hills where there isn't an investment in that, and folks are having to sacrifice. And so when I think about creating a welcoming city, it really is about the policy interventions that are necessary, but not only that, but organizing folks and mobilizing them around these issues. A lot of folks don't, I would say, don't, how would I say this? A lot of folks, you don't know you are in your situation until someone tells you, or you compare yourself, right? Yeah. And so it's not about waking folks up to the situation that they're in, but it's actually giving them the tools to acknowledge that there's a better way, and that folks have been stripping them of that systemically for generations, right? And so we spend a lot of time working with these organizations like TOP and Workers Defense Project and their members, and just trying to enlighten them to, there's a whole part of the city that you've never been to, which is North Dallas.
Good.
A lot of our folks have never been to North Park Mall and what that actually means. When we talk, someone mentioned malls and like the investment in that. So it's great to see what's happening at Redbird, but that's one part of the city, right? Like our city is huge. And so I think about equity.
So that's the idea that Kevin was talking about, convening places, right?
Yeah, but I think about equity with that, right? We unfortunately right now we live in a city that is inequitable.
Because everybody has access to Clyde Warren Park.
And access in regards to monetary?
Anybody can go there.
Can they? Can they get there?
Well, I guess that's part of the answer.
So that's the part, right? So I say this to say that when we look at something as simple as a welcoming city, it's nuanced. Like, not everyone does have access to that, right? Like, DART does not go everywhere. It doesn't. And I experienced that when I first moved back home from Washington, D.C. President Michael Sorrell asked me to come back home to be a special assistant, and my car was still in D.C. I had to Uber from Mesquite to get to Paul Quinn because there wasn't public transportation. I'm a person of means. I have a master's degree, but my car was still in D.C. I had to spend 6 weeks until my car came back down to get to Paul Quinn every day for work. I had to Uber. And so I'm working class. I can't imagine someone that is impoverished and was trying to get to their job every day and couldn't spend $15, $20 to get to their place every day.
So part of what I'm hearing from you is smiles are great, being kind is great, the ideals are great, wearing the Cowboys jersey on Sundays is great. There's a commonality, but there are some systemic issues in that. So Omar, and also you alluded to Thanksgiving Square, a public space. I think one of the places where the symbolism of unity is there out in the open. As a faith leader in the Muslim community, how do you feel that community feels in Dallas?
Depending on what part of Dallas you're in, and that's actually the point, right? So we have this huge growth of Muslim community in Dallas and Texas. Texas as a state has the largest Muslim community in the country. I don't know why Muslims chose to settle Texas, but it's happening,
Right.
New York, they were a welcoming state. Yeah, we got, someone was trying to get somewhere else. It was, no, I say that in jest, obviously. It's a beautiful community, and we have, first the Muslim community was clustered in New York, obviously the legacy of Malcolm X and sort of the largest population of Muslims in New York, and then the immigration that took place there. And then Texas suddenly is on the map. And so you got a lot of Muslims moved here for opportunities and moved to different parts of Texas, and it's obviously huge. We also got 10% of the country's hate groups. So we've had regular armed white supremacist protests in front of our mosques. I mean, so things that don't happen in any other state happen in Texas. They happen in Dallas is the only place where that's happened in the greater Dallas area, where you had regular armed white supremacist groups coming in front of our mosques, and it wasn't even a news item after like the first 3-4 times, because it was like, all right, this is just the thing we just had to get used to, that I have to take my kids to a mosque and that's what they're going to see. So Dallas, I think what's happening in Texas and what's happening for a lot of these communities is that they isolate sometimes not out of that being the desired goal, but out of safety, out of concern. So, we'll move into a bunch of neighborhoods, but like, hey, let's try to stay away from certain parts where there's a rise of hate crimes or where we're going to feel particularly unwelcomed. And there's something that you said that really struck me. I just came back from New Zealand. I went to Christchurch after the terrorist attack in New Zealand. I washed bodies. I led the prayers for the victims in New Zealand. And I spent some time there and really soaked it in. And one thing that my community in Texas said, community in Dallas said, is that we expected an attack like that to happen, but we expected it in Texas, not New Zealand. Right? So like my community was expecting, has been bracing itself for one of those fanatics to actually come in with a gun and start spraying people with bullets. It happened in New Zealand instead, which is supposed to be the safest country in the world. And here's what I saw there. People would come up and the story in New Zealand was, this is not of us, right? Because the shooter, the terrorist cited Donald Trump in his manifesto 28 times. He cited Ben Shapiro, and he was citing American commentators, and so they said this is American imported terror. And the view in New Zealand, or the words in New Zealand, where the sentiment was, this is not us. We're a welcoming country, and we love our immigrant population. We love our Muslim community. We love our ethnic communities. And then I started hearing from some of the Muslim communities and some of the communities like, actually, we haven't felt very welcomed here. Yeah, no one shot us dead yet, but this is the first time, like this type of an attack on this scale was not anticipated. But actually, no, we felt very unwelcomed in New Zealand. And you could see that the conversation was changing in week 2 over there to where it was, well, what have we been doing wrong? Right? Well, wait a minute, we weren't thinking about this. Like, how have we been making people feel unwelcome? And obviously, there's the dimension of an immigrant population there, but it wasn't, they're native New Zealanders as well that were a part of that. And the largest group of American Muslims are actually African Americans. So the idea of a foreign group of people is a flawed idea in the first place. But here's what I'll say to just keep it Dallas-centric, I think. Part of being welcoming is showing vulnerability. What can I do to make you more comfortable? And being open and honest about our flaws and saying, look, we want to be better, right? So it's not we're going to try to ignore or invisibilize our problems or invisibilize populations that are impoverished and complaining about never having felt welcomed as residents of this city. What can we do better? And so I would say that, what precedes bad policy is a bad narrative. And often we count on dominant voices to tell the stories of those impoverished communities and tell the stories of those minorities and tell the stories of people that haven't felt welcomed and have felt left out. And I think that's the role that media plays, for example, of amplifying the voices of communities themselves, giving them a space to actually be able to tell their own stories, to say, hey, this is how we're really feeling right now as communities. And we're not saying this because we want to make you uncomfortable. We're saying this because we all want to be comfortable. This isn't to make you feel like you're under attack right now because you live in prosperity and you don't have to worry about the things we have to worry about. This is to say that if we want to be more wholesome and actually have a society that is welcoming to all, then let's hear from all. So how do we bring voices to the table? And that's something that the Dallas Morning News can do. That's something that the Dallas Institute can do. That's something that your local media channels can do. But how do we, and that's something that Thanksgiving Square can do, or Faith. I'm very proud of what Faith Forward Dallas has accomplished. We were born out of hate. We were born because of hate. And that's usually, unfortunately, what happens is that these types of things come out after a very unfortunate incident. We didn't try to dust anything or brush anything under the carpet. We said, let's tackle these issues head on. But it's hateful incidents that propelled us, that brought us together. When I was in New Orleans, we co-founded the largest interfaith, East Jefferson Interfaith Clergy Association there, and it was because in 2008, David Duke and his clan were burning crosses on black families' lawns in predominantly white neighborhoods as Barack Obama was starting to rise in his candidacy. So it was sort of a message that was being sent to black families in New Orleans. And we came together, and then we realized, we should try to move beyond the moment. So let's form a faith coalition. I'm very proud that 11 years later, that coalition is still very strong in New Orleans. Here, Faith Forward Dallas, We formed because of the rise of hateful incidents, but we've fallen in love with each other as people in the process. We've absolutely fallen in love with each other. We've become family to one another as faith leaders, and our communities are like, it's contagious, right? You know, so we did an interfaith dialogue at All Michaels last year for the first time, and you know, we thought interfaith dialogue. Linda's there, by the way, so you could raise your hand. So I see some Faith Forward Dallas people here. So we did our an interfaith dialogue. It was just, you know, here we go. A rabbi, a priest, and an imam are going to talk about faith. You know, interfaith dialogues are exciting, right?
Second year for that.
Yeah, so we had our second year now, right? But first year, we had over 1,000 people come. You couldn't find parking. It was like the happening event. Like, who's going to want to sit there and listen? It's like we can't attract in an individual capacity this amount of people into our places of worship, but it's contagious. And so you amplify, you welcome voices that don't typically get heard. You amplify those voices. You show concern and vulnerability and say, you know what, we're not going to invisibilize problems or people that make us uncomfortable. We want to be welcoming to everybody, and we will not feel wholesome if, you know, when conversations about security are how do we feel secure from other parts of the city. Everyone deserves security. Security through and from law enforcement. Security with one another. Communities deserve to thrive. All communities deserve to thrive. And the last thing I'll say on that is I look at our response after July 7th, the horrible shootings, the police shootings in July 7th. There was a tendency in reacting to that horrible incident to say that, you know, police community relations have always been great in Dallas. We can't imagine anything to have happened here. And, you know, we would understand if this happened somewhere else. Very similar to the New Zealand response that I saw. Well, you know, things are great over here, and if Donald Trump didn't get elected president, we wouldn't have had a hateful bigot walk into a mosque and take 51 lives in New Zealand. So police community relations are great over here. We don't understand why it happened here. Now, it's a horrible thing that shouldn't happen anywhere, but we still need meaningful conversations between law enforcement and communities about how communities feel safer and how law enforcement feels safer and how we start to become a more wholesome society. We shouldn't brush these things under the carpet. We should speak with one another lovingly about how we make it welcoming for everybody.
So you're talking about two elements that I'm trying to summarize some of the things that you're mentioning. One is candid conversations between individuals and groups, and the other element that you are bringing into the table is faith could be one of those vehicles that can lead to a society to, you know, be in unity and be more welcoming. All right.
If a rabbi, if rabbis, imams, pastors, priests, different people, different denominations, different communities, different realities can unite with one another despite having actual creedal differences and differences in belief that define their lives and their identities, then that can become transformative for the entirety of society. Society as a whole can take from that, lessons from that, even people of no faith, about how you can talk to one another and love one another despite your deepest differences, despite differences that are based in convictions, but having that same level of dedication to one another as you have to your own belief and to your own set of principles and convictions.
Thank you. So, Ginger, you share your family's story. Clearly, the city is doing some things right. What are the things that you feel that we need to emphasize from your experience and also the larger community? What are the things that we're doing right that we need to keep intensifying on?
Well, I do love the fact that, you know, Dallas is so business focused, and there is that element of economic empowerment, because I would not have had the opportunities to grow up the way I did here in America back home. And my parents grew up in very small towns in south of Taiwan, and my mother didn't finish elementary school, and my father barely got a technical institute that's like a high school equivalent education. And so when the opportunity came to move up north to Taipei, so the 6 girls, they just kept trying for a boy, and it didn't happen. And 6 girls later, they said, maybe it's time. And that it's that gender inequity, right? That a boy is valued so much more. And I am a descendant of refugees from China that escaped communism. And so Taiwan is considered a runaway province to mainland China. And so I've had conversations with people that, immediately when I write traditional Chinese or I speak Mandarin, and they think that I'm not from the homeland, and they stop speaking to me, and it's challenging. We didn't have the same kind of opportunities. Even my grandparents at one point, they're farmers, made fun of us that we spoke Mandarin and not the native Hokkien native language, and then they said, "Oh, you're big city folks now, and you don't want to come home." But it was because my parents wanted us to have access to success, and so when, like I said, when my dad lost his job, and my uncle called and said, "Hey, we're about to start a McDonald's version of Chinese restaurants, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Y'all want to come and help?"
Okay.
And my mother, without even pausing, said yes, because she knew what it would be like to come to America for us and for us girls. And so my two oldest sisters were already married, and so to my parents, they were water out of the bucket, and that was basically poured out opportunities that they could not affect that anymore. So they brought their 4 younger ones here. And I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma. They started an ESL program because of me. And it was like, what do we do with this kid that doesn't speak English? And there was another ABC American-born Chinese girl who did not want to hang out with me. So I hung out with the black kids, and and a couple other immigrants. This girl from Pakistan and the other ones from the Philippines, and we were kind of like our little lunch group. And so that all of those things that my parents sacrificed so much, to do all this, and and at the restaurants, they were told plenty of times, if there was anybody that didn't care for the food, to go back to where they came from.
Part of what I'm hearing is
Yeah.
The economy, business
that definitely
will lead the
is,
way, and then things happen after
that
that.
definitely leads the way and opens up things, but there's so much inequity that is still happening that, and when I show up in a room of, either a charitable event or whatnot, I'm often one of the very few women, or one of the very few Asian women who show up in spaces like this, and it's I'm look at this right now, and I can count, and that's challenging, and why is it not a direct path to come and hear more of these things, or do more good, and why does my community not care about this, and when it's not entirely the whole, but it's become a norm, and I see challenges with that even that I have to disguise break borders as an economic empowerment opportunity that is a catering with a cause business, to talk people into listening to refugee stories about how, these women who are not only, we help so many people who are homeless in our backyard. These people are countryless, and people don't want to hear those stories, and it's there are definitely people that are like, just bring us the food. We don't need any stories. I'm like, well, that's okay. Yeah, have food, we'll travel. But but the people who are willing to, have the women not only just, drop off the food, but share their life stories about, where they came from, war-torn countries and whatnot. There's, if we have to trick them with economic empowerment to hear a few stories about food and culture, get our foot in the door, and that's okay. So we are doing those things right, by embracing, the job creation, those opportunities, and getting their foot in the door. But but at some point you have to hear how we created these issues, around our spaces, and not to just let people show up on the table, but at the table. I think that's, those are the challenges that we're trying to overcome.
All right, so opportunities, but a lot of challenges.
Yes.
So Liz, in your role, who's doing it right? Can you talk about any other city that either is doing it right or did it right years ago, decades ago? Is it a model for deeper integration and a more welcoming society?
Well, people like Danielle are doing it right. Just the fact that she's using her superpower of love and compassion and skill and artistry to empower recent arrivals. And Imam Omar talked about, well, how did all these Muslims end up in Texas? Well, because I was not being glib about it, but we are a welcoming state. People might not know that, but Texas has resettled, second only to California, at parts, the highest number of refugees in history of the Refugee Act since 1980. Yeah. And the great majority in Houston, and then in Dallas, a second to Houston. So literally, we are a welcoming nation, even if, like you point out, we're not doing such a great job once people get here to help integrate, to include, to foster development, to show them the way to access economic sustainability. But we're trying, right? We're trying to lift this platform and show that it's not a unique thing, right? It's the norm. 32% of entrepreneurs in Dallas are immigrant. And so it's not the norm. It's not like you're not like an outlier. You're just part of the economy, and you make it thrive. And so we need, at the city, we need to develop that narrative that is really the truth. The facts that Keven put up are facts. 93% of dreamers are employed. Well, why can't they get access to protection, to eventual citizenship? Why do we make it so hard for people to come, live, and thrive?
So let me ask you the same question, but is any other city in the country that is doing it right? Who's the model? What's the model?
Well, this Welcoming America framework that we are employing is really, out of Shelbyville, Tennessee. And so it's not the gateway of New York or San Francisco or even Chicago, but a very small community that realized that there were Kenyans and Somalis among them. And just, what do we do? There's people here, and they decided to do it the way we love to do it, eating. And had these dinners, and we're talking to one another. And this guy named Dave LaBelle, who founded Welcoming America, said, we're onto something. We don't have to necessarily start at the policy or the law part or this versus that. We could just start with these conversations, that the what ifs. What if we could sit and have a conversation about one another? And out of that, blew up this Welcoming America initiative where there's they count 1 in 8 Americans live in a welcoming community. So we're the 27th municipal government that has created an office like this. We're not the first, but we are working on certification. There is a method to becoming certified, and it is working across systems: government leadership, safe, healthy, connected communities, civic engagement, economic and educational opportunity, and inclusion and equity. And so once we hit those parameters, which is, we could sit here all night and talk about my parameters, right? But it's not very interesting. We can call ourselves Welcoming Certified. And so we're working through that process right now. And there's 3 other cities that are certified. And there's Louisville, Kentucky, Dayton, Ohio, and Salt Lake City, Utah. And so we're working on becoming the 4th.
Good. So Keven, in your years, in the leading the editorial page at the Morning News, you talk to elected officials, you talk to nonprofits, many people that they were coming to Texas, they're coming to Dallas. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of identity as we talk about a welcoming community? Is there one Dallas identity that other communities or other groups they need to either conform to or be part of before being properly welcomed?
I think that identity is changing dramatically. I think, I referenced my ignorance about Dallas before I moved here. That was certainly an identity that persisted for a while, probably largely external to Dallas. But it's changed so dramatically since then, and I think it's hard to come up with an identity for Dallas. I think Dallas has so many identities. It's hard to braid all those strands together and come up with one identity. And so maybe the identity of Dallas is it just plain and simple, it's diversity. It is a big, growing, robust, I mean, that's what sets it apart from certain other cities, is we're big, we're growing, we've got a big can-do attitude about everything. But we're diverse, more diverse than most cities.
Let me interrupt that. You referenced the historical legacy of JFK and the TV series, which pretty much anywhere that you go and you say, I'm from Dallas, oh, well, you know about that, right? Or that's the reference. Do you think that that's a little bit in the past
I do.
as a primary reference to what Dallas is now?
I do. I don't think you hear that nearly as often now as we used to hear it. And I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think this community's come a long way since then, and there have been a lot of initiatives, public initiatives, to help move that ball forward. So I really do think that those identities are old news.
Good. How much more time do we have? Q&A now? Okay. Okay, so the panel here is ready to answer some of your questions.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. I hope I'm not blasting with this. This is really loud in my ears. It's away. So it's wonderful to see all these friends on the panel. My name's Linda Abramson Evans, and I can't ask a question of everybody, but Liz, could you mention something about the directory of services that our task force is working on? Because there might be people in the audience who have the kinds of services that should be on it that would welcome, be available for any international visitor or residents, refugees and immigrants. And so, for example, the Volunteer Guide to Refugee Services in Dallas that I developed for the United Nations Association in Dallas, the English language programs, the one I developed that I direct at SMU has low-cost tuition for students and professionals to develop communication skills. I bet that there are others that might have services, and how would they be able to connect with you or the task force? And then briefly for Imam Omar, regarding Faith Forward Dallas, I still run into people who do not know about it, and that as clergy members, they're automatically eligible to join, but now we have this new category of Friends of Faith Forward Dallas that non-clergy members, anybody can join, and we would like to welcome them. So if you could each mention briefly something about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And so we know from good works, like the kind of work that Mercedes does, that zip code, right, is the major determinant of your health. And so, how do we use that knowledge as some benefit to the residents of Dallas? And so we're working to create what we're calling a welcoming hub, but it's really a digital platform. So when you put in your zip code and you say 75206, which is my zip code, and I need an immigration service, I put in immigration services. Well, all of the agencies that are serving that community should ideally come up, right? So that people know what's where in their local community, because we know that transportation is an issue and it is an equity issue, and that we're trying to create ways for people to connect with what their social needs are in a more direct and relevant way. So anything from education to healthcare to other resources, I tell my boss it's like the Yelp of social service. And so anybody can get that, right? If you go to Google, right, you'll get, like when I was practicing immigration law, I paid Google, right, to put me up at the top. But here it's the social service, and so if you are connected with the social service and you want to be listed, then please connect with us. We're looking for relevant nonprofit organizations or social service agencies that can provide services to our community, and it's a free service. It's going to be available to all Dallas sites.
So is that on the Dallas website?
We're working on it.
Okay.
We're working on
So it's for everybody that got here, whether from El Salvador or Kansas or
whomever, right?
Anybody.
So, but we're tailoring
Okay.
it to, like, my office is Immigration and Refugee Service, right? So
Okay.
the consulates will come up, and
And so we'll be,
ESL will come up, and Immigration Service will come up. But if you go to housing, it'll be available housing.
Okay.
So a lot of work to do on that, but we'd love your input. Thank you, Linda.
more questions?
I'll just quickly answer. Question about Faith Forward Dallas. So Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square. We are now about actually going on 4 years old, 3.5 to 4 years old. We were formed, in response to some of the hateful incidents that took place in Dallas, and we decided to bring communities together. We have a large, vibrant group of faith leaders across the spectrum. I would venture to say we might be maybe one of the largest in Texas, in the state of Texas. And we called it a multi-faith coalition as opposed to an interfaith coalition on purpose, because we wanted it to be open to everyone coming to the table in the fullness of themselves, in the fullness of their tradition. Interfaith kind of has this connotation sometimes that you're going to have to diminish part of your own beliefs or diminish yourself to be a part of this. No, we're a multi-faith coalition, not saying there's anything wrong with interfaith work, where we brought people together to work on issues related to social justice and peace. And I had the blessing of serving as a co-chair, finished my term out with Rabbi Nancy Kasten and Pastor Michael Waters. So I got an emeritus title pretty early. I'm still waiting on it from SMU. I don't think this, maybe you could help lobby on the inside. But we decided to open it up to beyond faith leaders. We started off as only being faith leaders, and we have a Friends of Faith Forward Dallas now initiative where we welcome congregations and dedicated volunteers to help further the goals of Faith Forward Dallas. And we have committees that work on various social justice issues in partnership with a lot of the great initiatives like TOP and others that exist right now in our state and our city.
Thank you.
May I also mention that Faith Forward is coalescing to try to figure out how to assist with the border situation with communities along the border who are being overwhelmed by migrant issues and concerns, and asking cities like Dallas to step up and help. So Faith Forward is doing that as well.
Okay, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Alice Riggin-Stevenson, and I have a business for the last 27 years in hosting tourists and people coming into this as a destination. And Liz, maybe this is something that your realm can cover, because I've actually interfaced with, I've counted it up over the years, about 150,000 people personally coming in and with that welcome smile. And the first thing I tell them in Texas that everything is bigger, better, and the best. And we're not conceited, we're absolutely convinced. So that's how we start our tours of the city. And yes, they do come in to see Kennedy. And the 6th Floor Museum is one of the largest attended museums in the Southwest. So it does unfortunately have that realm. My problem with tourism in Dallas is that the way our transportation companies that are coming in are treated. There's no place to park a motor coach. There's only one side of the motor coach that you can get on and off. And parking in Dallas is becoming a really, really big problem for our coaches. And so I've been working with the tour guide association that I belong to locally, and we have just started, and I've presented to them a destination and task force idea that we would talk about transportation issues, attraction issues, on how our people are treated. These people are spending just an average of $200 a day, and I didn't even do the math over the years of, it's gotta be, millions of dollars being spent on Dallas hotels, restaurants, attractions, shopping malls. So they are not coming here freeloading. Right. They are actually adding to our economy. And we are treating them like there's even no place to go to the restroom downtown. We were kicked out of the one of the facilities that we use frequently and told that our visitors had to pay to use a toilet in Dallas. This is happening today as we speak. The farmers market, thank God, they've done so many great things there, and I love the changes. But that's always been a stop where we could use a decent restroom, and the facilities that are wonderful. I think I'm just excited about Dallas. Don't think I'm not. I love this city. I promoted it for over 30 years and more. And I want our visitors to feel that way. I want our motor coach companies to not be chased away for 5-minute parking when they're in a zone that you can park there. If there's construction, I had a guy the other day on a tour, and I left him to go show my Thanksgiving Square, which I think is a great part of our community. And I was gone 5 minutes. I came back, and he was almost to get a ticket for being parked in a place that our motor coaches park all the time. So whoever on the panel can help me, I would appreciate your assistance.
Well, thank you.
And
So-
we have a director of transportation, Mike Rogers, and I'm going to connect you with him, if I might, to see how we do need to hear those things. Just as Kevin was talking about, a bathroom makes a difference, right, when you're traveling in your RV. And no, I'm talking about her, and then your motor coach, wherever it might be. But if you can't, y'all are simpaticos, and we need to do better.
Thank you. So I think that we had time for 2 more questions, but this last participation, it was really good in terms of pointing out some of the issues that has been discussed here. Transportation, one of those issues, infrastructure, visitor center, just being friendly.
Equity.
Right.
So you guys have talked about economic opportunity being one of the aspects of becoming a welcoming city. I would like to hear more nuance about what economic opportunity should be looked to. What should we look to for valuable economic opportunity that speaks to morals of a welcoming city, as opposed to economic opportunity that could actually increase the weight of a bootstrap or a boot on the back of or the necks of minorities in a particular city or a particular area of a city. So based on what she talked about earlier, I forget the woman's name, but I was just in Atlanta recently, and it kind of is a spinoff on what she talked about. There's a lot of areas in certain cities, especially when you have gentrification involved, where a lot of times companies that are currently situated in those areas, they lack or they lose out on the opportunity to continue getting customers or patrons because of the fact that the city is being zoned in a different way than how the city was zoned previously when they first saw the economic opportunity and they first parked themselves there to start making money. So I would like to hear more nuance about what economic opportunities should be looked at. Also, we also need to talk about how do we, partake in certain economic opportunities and not create more marginalized, scenarios where folks are losing out on economic opportunities as well. Because I think a lot of times we sacrifice certain economic opportunities for some folks to bolster economic opportunities for other folks. If that makes any sense.
Well, we may not have all the time to get all the nuances that you demand. Anybody here wants to talk a little bit, Kevin or Liz?
I'm happy to address what I do in terms of economic opportunity and education opportunity. Give as an example, Jinya, who is creating a business with a social enterprise component, right? But exposing and raising up these businesses that can get further opportunity, right? And so working on trying to create vendor opportunities for small businesses that are run by people of color, that are run by first generation, that are run by refugee women, and hopefully giving them that platform to create additional opportunities. We know that many migrants and refugees come with various skills, right? Engineering degrees, teaching degrees, science backgrounds, et cetera, and oftentimes aren't able to navigate the network because, one, they don't have a network to start off with, or two, their credentials are not transferable. So we're working through that this year to try to figure out how do we create, from my office's perspective, more opportunities for people to become credentialed. We know, like the story that ran in the morning news recently about the majority of Mexican migrants now are coming with college degrees. And so how do you create opportunities for people to not only do what they were doing back home, but actually to thrive and build their businesses here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area?
And just, creating those paths, to success and make it accessible. And, been working in the refugee community in Vickery Meadow and area, and most of the women that we work with don't know how to drive, and English is probably their fourth or fifth language, coming from different refugee camps in whether it's in Jordan, Egypt, and whatnot, and so the only language they speak is food and cell phone. And so trying to use, the most common denominator and helping them get to success quicker, and like in our industry for catering, most of the languages that, these food handlers permits or food manager license, if the women are interested in starting their own careers and their own, catering business and starting, anything new on their own, most of the languages are offered are in English, in Spanish, and it actually is even offered in Chinese, Japanese, Korean before there is, Arabic or Farsi. Or Burmese, and that's challenging. Dallas being the second largest city, and Fort Worth being the next of after Houston, having all these refugees that come here, and they're people that need these workforces in the industry, and so it's providing that easiest path to that success. But it is challenging when a certain area is zoned off to quote unquote, be closer to refugee agencies and closer to the social services, but they're stuck in these communities because they think it's like the cheapest housing possible, but it's not, and so trying to get them jobs and those economic opportunities, sometimes it's a catch-22, and so we really have to look at what to unpack in those chances that that they don't spend so much time trying to get to a space and not earn living wages, and so we're really trying to cut those paths in much shorter, and so it is equitable access, and so it is easier to get to, whether it's just because somebody doesn't know how to read or write, that doesn't mean they don't deserve a job, and just because someone is not certified here to teach, that doesn't mean they don't get to teach. And just finding out, and it's not just conversing with the community, but also doing a lot of really deep listening to how to get that water when they ask for it.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time. Actually, we're out of time.
No.
I will be quick. I actually have an idea. My name is Helen Michelle Newsom.
Excuse me. Why don't we take a quick break? I know some of you need to go, right? And so we respect the time, and then take a quick break and come back, and we'll continue. Okay? Great. For our talk back.